On About Books, we delve into the latest news about the publishing industry with interesting insider interviews with publishing industry experts. We'll also give you updates on current nonfiction authors and books, the latest book reviews, and we'll talk about the current nonfiction books featured on C-SPAN's Book TV.
And welcome to About Books. In a few minutes, we'll talk about the impact and some of the controversies surrounding the book review website Goodreads. But first, here's some of the latest news from the publishing world. Well, 9 months after a federal judge blocked the publishing merger of Simon & Schuster and Penguin Random House, Simon & Schuster has found a new home. The private equity firm KKR has agreed to purchase the 99-year-old company for a reported $1.6 billion. In making the announcement, KKR said that Simon & Schuster president and CEO Jonathan Karp will continue to lead the company. In other news, Amazon recently removed 5 books from its website that were attributed to Jane Friedman after the author claimed that she never wrote those titles. Friedman said that she believes the books were generated using AI technology. Friedman, who also authors a newsletter on the publishing industry, said on her Twitter page, quote, "This promises to be a serious problem for the book publishing world. How long until it happens again? What about authors who don't have the ability to raise a big red flag like I do?" Unquote. And one note on book sales numbers this summer, the news website Publishing Perspectives noted that July sales were down 4% year on year. Year to date, some 408 million books have been sold in the United States through July. And finally, one tragic piece of publishing news. Bloomsbury Publishing lost its president, Adrian Vaughn, in a boating accident off the Amalfi Coast earlier this month. The Associated Press reported that Ms. Vaughn, who was 45 years old, died when the motorboat that she was traveling in crashed into a chartered sailboat. The AP noted in its report that Ms. Vaughn's husband and the skipper of the motorboat were also injured in that collision. Before joining Bloomsbury, Vaughn had worked at Scholastic, Disney Publishing, Oxford University Press, and several other publishing houses. She was elected to the Association of American Publishers Board of Directors earlier this year. And now a discussion with New York Times book reporter Elizabeth Harris. We talked to her about the review website Goodreads, how that website can help with sales numbers, but also about the online phenomenon known as review bombing.
Elizabeth Harris is a books and publishing reporter for the New York Times. Ms. Harris, in a recent piece you wrote entitled "How Review Bombing Can Tank a Book Before It's Published," you tell the story of author Cecilia Rabess. Who is that?
Cecilia Rabess was a data scientist at Google who wrote a novel and sold it to Simon & Schuster and then quit to focus on writing. And the book, which is called Everything's Fine, was this really anticipated book. And Simon Schuster had very high hopes for it. It was on a bunch of most anticipated books of the summer lists and things like that. But months ago, before the book was even out, there were some review copies sent out to advanced readers, which is a thing that publishers do for most books. And review copies were sent out to some advanced readers, and somebody found the jacket copy problematic. It describes a Black woman who goes to work at Goldman Sachs, who then has a relationship with a conservative white guy who has bigoted views. And without reading the book, somebody posted on social media that they found the premise offensive. And it kind of blew up. And there was a lot of responses on social media. And then it moved to Goodreads, which is this platform that's sort of a combination of like a review website like Yelp and also sort of part social media platform where anyone can review any book. And suddenly the book had tons and tons of 1-star reviews. And, written by people who said, "I've never read the book, but I object to the idea," basically. And this is a thing that can happen where people who haven't actually read the book can weigh in publicly and it can kind of take off and take on a life of its own. And there can, one person expressing a view, great, but then sort of it can snowball, and suddenly you can end up with dozens or hundreds of negative reviews, even if only a handful of people in the world have read the book.
And who owns Goodreads?
Amazon. Amazon bought it in 2013.
And can anybody post on Goodreads?
Yes. So Goodreads is interesting because anyone can post. You can set a profile and post reviews, and there's this tricky problem, right, where you don't really want people reviewing a book they haven't read, but also you can't. Oops, I'm so sorry. You don't want people reviewing a book they haven't read, but you also have to be, if you're a publisher, for example, like you don't necessarily want people to have to prove that they purchased the book in order to review it, because what would that look like? Amazon owns Goodreads, so would it be that only people who buy a book on Amazon can review a book? Is not necessarily something you as a publisher and author would want. So it's a tricky problem, but yeah, anyone can post. And it's a huge platform now with, an enormous number of readers. And it's a really huge undertaking to really get in and moderate every comment, and to have a human do that would be just enormous and expensive. And so it's ballooned into this huge platform that's very influential and important for publishers, but in some cases can be wonderful, and in some cases can get pretty out of control.
So people are objecting to Everything's Fine, or were objecting to Everything's Fine, because of the premise of the book rather than the what's written in the book.
That's right. It was. There were maybe some people who had read the book, because there were advanced copies out there, and that happens for, books that are highly anticipated, is publishers will send out review copies trying to get buzz going, often on Goodreads. They want people to read the book and review the book and leave positive comments. But many of the comments on Goodreads and also on social media were people just trashing the premise without having actually engaged with the book itself.
Now, Elizabeth Harris, we talked to you previously on Book TV about Book Talk. How does Goodreads compare to Book Talk?
They serve kind of similar purposes within the world of books. The biggest challenge for a book or a publisher right now is to get a book noticed. The sort of traditionally, people might wander around a bookstore and maybe a cover would catch your eye, or a book would be sitting next to a book you were looking at. You put it down, you pick up the next one, or there's a staff recommends table or something. And there was a lot of sort of accidental discovery that happened in bookstores that really, for whatever reason, just doesn't happen online. Like usually if we go to a big online retailer, say, we go looking for a book, we search for the book, we buy the book, we leave the website. Maybe the algorithm says, you might also like this and this. Maybe you look at it, maybe you don't, but for whatever reason, it just doesn't translate the same way as going into a bookstore, to sort of finding these accidental discoveries. So Book Talk is great for, it's been this incredible engine for book discovery, because books will go viral on TikTok, people just sort of talking about these books they love, and they'll sell, and they'll kind of shoot up the bestseller list. Now retailers pay attention to what's going on Book Talk, and like Barnes & Noble, for example, will have, tables of as seen on Book Talk, where they sort of promote, it's sort of this cross-promotional thing where they kind of call attention to the books that are doing well on Book Talk, and, sort of a cycle that feeds into itself. And Goodreads is sort of similar in a way, in that it's another way where publishers and authors hope their books will be discovered. If you can get people excited about a book and you send out advanced copies, for example, and get people writing good reviews, it can help, it can help generate buzz, and it can be a place where, people go and find out about a book. Often, people will Google a book and like, oh, it has 4 or 5 stars on Goodreads, I'll go check it out. If it has 1 or 2, maybe I'll skip it. So it's similar in that it's just trying to help people, from an author and a publisher's perspective. It's another way to help their books get out there. So it's become really, really important, and can be really great for that, and can really start conversations and be a place where people who love books can engage with the books and engage with each other, and help, get the word out.
And in your review bombing article in the New York Times, you write that, quote, publishers face a near existential problem to reach readers.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's really an incredible challenge, this discoverability issue. I mean, there's, it's, how to describe it? It's basically that, even if, 100 books sold this year and 100 books sold 10 years ago, it would be, the concentrations are different. Whereas, it would have been sort of a greater number of books selling the same quantity. Now it's a few books that sell a ton, and that's how you sort of reach that same quantity. So that's a very rough, back of the envelope explanation, but that's the idea, right? Like, there's Colleen Hoover, for example, who is a author that really blew up on TikTok, has just dominated the bestseller list for, well over a year at this point, which is really unheard of. She has, sometimes more than 5 books at a time on the bestseller list. I mean, it's really incredible. And, that didn't used to be the case, but it can, a few books can just like take off and keep kind of cycling. Because when you get on the bestseller list, that too is a form of discovery and a form of advertising in a way. Like, people look at the bestseller list to figure out what to read next. So once you're on it, that helps propel you. And, she's still big on TikTok, and that helps propel you. And once you become big, people hear of you, and that helps propel you. And so, there's this sort of narrowing of the funnel of books that get readers' attention. And it's a really enormous challenge for publishers trying to figure out, how do you reach readers with more books? And no one's quite cracked the code yet.
Well, speaking of Colleen Hoover, have you ever had the chance to talk to her? I've noticed that about the bestseller list as well, that she's got 4 or 5 on there on a regular basis.
I haven't. She's very charming on social media, though.
Are there other sites like Goodreads, Book Talk, that we should know about?
Let's see. I mean, Instagram served a similar purpose for a while. It still sort of does, but it never moved books the way Book Talk does. YouTube also used to be like kind of people talking about books on YouTube a lot. That sold some, but really, like, Book Talk is really its own kind of crazy thing right now. And Goodreads is another, huge. I mean, it's Amazon, right? So it's huge. It's hugely important in the world of books. Those are, I mean, they do slightly different things, but they're kind of, I don't know if comparable is the right word, but they are at the top, I would say.
Did Amazon start Goodreads originally?
They did not. They bought it about 10 years ago.
Do you know who started it?
I don't remember. I've only been covering books for 3 years, to be completely honest.
So going back to
edit that out. Yeah.
Going back to Cecilia Rabess, what happened to Everything's Fine? Did it sell well? Did these negative reviews pre-publication hurt the sale?
So it's hard to say for sure. So it's print sales, according to BookScan, which is a company that tracks about 80% of the print market in the United States. So according to BookScan, it has sold about 2,400 copies so far, which is not a lot. I mean, it's not terrible for most books, but given the push behind it and the expectations for it, it's a disappointing number. And it's the thing that's sort of hard to say is it is so hard to make a book break out, and maybe this would have happened anyway, but certainly what happened did not help.
Well, another author you talk about in this story, Elizabeth Harris, is a best-selling author, Elizabeth Gilbert. What happened to The Snow Forest, her pending book?
Yes, so Elizabeth Gilbert announced her next novel recently, called The Snow Forest, and almost immediately got a huge amount of backlash on social media, on Instagram and Goodreads in particular. The book is a novel that's set in Russia in the mid-20th century, and the objections that she got was essentially that the book was set in Russia at all, and people were very upset. Some people were very upset that given the war in Ukraine, she was writing a book set in Russia. And what she did really shocked the literary world, I have to say, is that she just days later decided to postpone publication of the book indefinitely. And her publisher, Riverhead, stood by her, and she was able to make that decision. And so the book has been postponed because it was set in Russia.
And did she apologize for writing a book that was set in Russia at some point?
I don't think she apologized. She said I don't want to add. I could be wrong about that, honestly, and I should check, but I kind of remember having a conversation about this. I know what she did say was that she didn't want to add any more hurt to the Ukrainian community, which has already experienced an enormous amount of hurt and pain at this point. And this is not the time to publish the book. That was, I believe.
And of course, Elizabeth Gilbert wrote the best-selling Eat, Pray, Love. Elizabeth Harris, is there a censorship angle here to these reviews?
Let's see. I mean, it depends on how you define censorship, right? Like, this isn't government censorship. The government has nothing to do with it. But, is it shutting down? Is it shutting people down before their views can really be heard? Like the books that get review bombed in an organized fashion before anyone engages with the content, because maybe it's possible that someone could be offended by a two-sentence description of the book, by the premise of the book, and then read the book and find that it really grapples with issues they care about, right? You never know. And maybe it wouldn't, but this sort of thing does shut down discussion in a way, because there is that social media, virality kind of jumping on that can happen, where it can be hard to hear other voices when people are yelling really loud on the internet. But I will say that the Elizabeth Gilbert thing was interesting because there was backlash when she announced her book was coming out and it was set in Russia. Then she said that she was postponing it. But then there was a backlash to that. And a lot of people were very uncomfortable with the idea that she was pulling her book. And some people did call it self-censorship. And, the idea that, you can't set a book in a country, it's a historical fiction, like that kind of thing. I mean, also just the way books are written, usually you hand in a book about a year before it comes out. So like you can't predict the future. And a lot of people felt that it was a really bad precedent to declare an entire country off limits, essentially, especially coming from an author with such a big platform and such a following already. And there was a lot of concern initially that people would feel compelled to do the same. But it seems like the backlash to the backlash was intense enough that I don't know that that's necessarily going to happen.
So do publishers listen or read what's on Goodreads or on Book Talk?
Yes, they try. They definitely try and keep on top of what's on Book Talk. And it's tricky to predict. So it's hard, like in acquisition conversations. So like when they're deciding whether or not to buy a book that an author has written, they certainly talk about like, oh, this might be a great book for TikTok, but they can't count on it because it's a pretty unpredictable thing, like what's going to go viral. So that's interesting, but they definitely pay attention. And Goodreads the same. They pay a lot of attention to how their books are performing on Goodreads, books that are coming out. They're books that they really want to perform well, books they've paid a lot of money for example. They do what they can to try and get some good buzz going on Goodreads so that when the book comes out, it's already got, 4 or 5 stars or whatever it is they're aiming for, so that when people look it up, when they first hear about the book, because a book gets its sort of, traditionally, Book Talk aside, books usually get get the most attention right when they're brand new, and they get kind of a couple weeks if they're lucky of that. And then often it becomes very difficult to surface a book after that. So publishers want there to be kind of a good stamp on Goodreads by then, at least a little one. They want something so that people will know to, when they Google it, they'll say, oh, like some people have liked this book, maybe I would like it too.
Elizabeth Harris, for this story, did you talk to Goodreads, and what did they have to say?
My colleague Alexandra Alter, with whom I wrote the story, spoke to Goodreads. And, they said they take very seriously the kind of community standards on the site, and they work really hard to, make sure that their rules are followed. Like, if there are multiple reviews from one person, for example, that is one way that like a review bombing, as it's called, could go. One person could write 50 one-star reviews. Like, that's not allowed. And so they work hard to try and make sure that doesn't happen, or if it does, they take it down. And then things like insulting the authors personally, things like that are prohibited. So they say that they're trying and doing their best to kind of keep a, civil and robust community.
Now, something else you've written about, Elizabeth Harris, is ByteDance. What is that?
Mm-hmm. So ByteDance is the company that owns TikTok, and they are looking to start their own publishing company, which is so interesting because BookTok has become such a force that now ByteDance wants to get in on the action themselves.
And is there a conflict of interest there?
It's an interesting question. I mean, I think what some authors are concerned about, and some publishers are concerned about, but especially authors, is, what happens now is that, books go viral because people love them. And, people, will be weeping about how much they love a book on TikTok, and other people will think, I want a book makes me feel that much as well. And, things go viral for authentic reasons, more or less at this point. And, though, that's changing sort of, the older a platform gets, the more established it gets, so the more there's sort of sponsorship involved and things like that. But nonetheless, it's still fairly grassroots, and there's still things taking off because readers respond to them. And the concern among authors is that if ByteDance starts publishing books themselves, they'll put their thumb on the scale, essentially, to make their posts about their books go viral. And I mean, they haven't said they're doing this. We have no idea. But if you had this platform and we're going to publish these books, presumably that would at least be a tempting thing to do, right? To make sure that your books got seen on this platform that is so powerful for selling books. And so the concern is that it will take attention away from books that would have gone viral on their own because people are responding to them, and that it will kind of take the oxygen out of the room in that way, and then also that it might just sort of mess up the platform, right? That people like the BookTok community because they trust the recommendations on it because of they tend to be based in sort of people's enthusiasm for the books they read. And if it becomes, many of the things that are going viral because ByteDance decides that they should go viral, maybe it's not that good at what it does anymore. Maybe it's not that fun. So those are sorts of the concerns that if it decided to pursue it in this way, it could be detrimental to BookTok overall.
And finally, Elizabeth Harris, have publishers kept up with new strategies for review bombing and for getting their books on Goodreads or on BookTok?
They're trying. I mean, for BookTok, for example, there's lots of publishers have a lot of relationships with BookTok influencers now, which is sort of what I was thinking of when I was talking about kind of increasing sponsorships as platforms mature. So, there are influencers that charge a lot of money for videos. Some of them have kind of rules that they make for themselves about they're only going to promote a book if they like it. But I'm sure all of them do not have such rules. And, who can blame them? I mean, if somebody's offering you, serious money to, do a 10-second review of a book, such is the world we live in, right? But yeah, so publishers are, send review copies out and they try and engage them. They'll send, they'll create sort of these packages for reviewers so they can have this sort of elaborate unboxing of the books. And that makes a nice visual video and that kind of thing. So they're trying to do that. And Goodreads is tricky just because it's Amazon. And so it can be harder to, it can be a hard nut to crack, and it's not, you're not dealing with individual readers who are, eager to keep their following going on TikTok. This is, a huge, extremely powerful corporation. And so it's a totally different relationship that the publishers have with them.
Elizabeth Harris is a books and publishing reporter for the New York Times, and we appreciate you joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
And this is About Books, a program and a podcast produced by C-SPAN's Book TV. Well, each Tuesday, dozens of new books are published. Here's a few. Baptist minister and Christianity Today editor-in-chief Russell Moore is out with his newest book titled Losing Our Religion, an Altar Call for Evangelical America. Mr. Moore has authored several other books about religion and culture. He previously led the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission of the Southern Baptist Convention. And a trio of sociology and public affairs scholars are out with a new book about America's poorest places and poorest people. The book is titled The Injustice of Place, Uncovering the Legacy of Poverty in America. It's by Princeton professors Catherine Eden and Timothy Nelson and University of Michigan professor Luke Schaefer. And University of Utah philosophy and internal medicine professor James Tabery offers a warning about the future of personalized medicine in his new book, Tyranny of the Gene, Personalized Medicine and Its Threat to Public Health. And coming up on Book TV, it's our author interview program Afterwards. This week, it's former United Airlines CEO and chair Oscar Munoz, who spoke about his efforts to revive the company and the future of aviation. He was interviewed by USA Today reporter Zach Wichter. Here's a bit of that interview.
I talk about my first travel. I am traveling. No one knows that I'm about to become the CEO. It's going to be announced the following day, so I'm traveling incognito. And of course, I have one of those hellacious flights. It's a small 50-seater. It's United Express, not United. We're late. We're delayed. We have issues, mechanical. I mean, it's a litany of things that were going wrong that day. And the way I describe it is, over the course of my sitting there, I'm writing all of these things down. Why don't we do this? Why can't we do this? Why can't we communicate to our customers why things are being delayed? So I'm writing all this stuff as to kind of a what's wrong column. But throughout all of that, what I observed in this small plane with one, human, a woman that was the flight attendant, watching her soothe, calm, provide a level of humanity and kindness to everyone that was concerned with connections and delays, even if she didn't have the answer. And that's what prompted me to say what somebody might term as cliche, is the fact that indeed, it's like it's not everything that what's wrong, but it's what is right. And that was the first thing I put it right. And so that gave me the impetus to your question to say, okay, I just saw if I had 50,000 more people like her every day doing that sort of thing, I think the perception of our service and our value, despite a lot of things, would be more positive. And so as I asked her a couple of questions, she didn't know who I was. She was very nice to answer the things she knew and the things she didn't. And that sort of began to get the inkling that it would be important for me to go out and listen to all of those people, all the people like her. And that's what prompted me to go out there, and it's also what gave me a lot of the insights of what became our real first initiative, was to regain the trust of our employees first before we could do anything else.
A reminder that Afterwards airs every Sunday at 10 p.m. on Book TV. Well, thanks for joining us on About Books, a program and a podcast produced by Book TV. We'll continue to bring you publishing news and author programs, and a reminder that you can get this podcast on the C-SPAN Now app. You can also watch online anytime at booktv.org.